to get funky. This is from 4 hours ago. Right before she ran out of here.
Shoulders back, chest out. Totally different posture, right?
Totally different girl.
Trisha's got it. It's multiple personality disorder.
Multiple personality disorder, also referred to as split personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder, is mysterious, perplexing, controversial, and virtually unheard of. Many everyday people incorrectly attribute symptoms of dissociative identity disorder to what schizophrenics experience.
So her alter witnessed a murder.
Or committed a murder.
William James was the first to discover DID in the late 19th century. He believed that those suffering from the disorder had an unnatural stream of consciousness that linked together memories and the separate parts of the self, thus changing the structure of the brain. Other famous psychologists such as Sigmund Freud and Joseph Beru commented on the possibility of a dissociation disorder containing alternate identities. They were also the first to comment that the dissociation could be linked to the occurrence of traumatic emotional events.
So have either of you heard of schizophrenia before?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, could either of you describe that in like your own words?
Is it the kind where you have like multiple personalities? Or when you like hallucinate? One of those two, I think.
Okay. So have you guys ever heard of schizophrenia? Have you ever heard of schizophrenia before?
I have.
Okay, would you be able to describe it in your own words? So have you ever heard of dissociative identity disorder?
No.
And then have you ever heard of dissociative identity disorder?
Yes, I watched United States of Terror. It's a fantastic show. Yeah, that is intense, and that's when a bad memory, they block it out, and then they their body's way of coping with it is by creating new identities for themselves.
Dissociative identity disorder is an entirely different family from schizophrenia, and there are different types of schizophrenia within the DSM-4, which now is been revised to be the DSM-5. So, dissociative identity disorder, the idea comes from dissociating, where you have a moment where you are sort of disconnected from your normal state. Now, there are different types of dissociation within the dissociative disorder family. DID, most famously formerly known as multiple personality disorder, differs from schizophrenia in that schizophrenia, you tend to see symptoms of delusions, you tend to see auditory and visual hallucinations, you tend to see thought disorders, you tend to see movement disorders. With DID, it's far more opaque. We don't really know. The symptoms that we tend to see are people forgetting large segments of their life, and that's the number one symptom. There's a controversy, obviously a huge controversy about DID, about whether a host can have numerous alters. There's no real evidence that I know of that actually confirms all of these different alters. Schizophrenia, you can see it. You can see someone who's having a psychotic break. You can see somebody who's experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations, someone who is pulling on their hair, somebody who is stopping in the middle of their speech. With DID, it's far harder to actually determine that someone is actually an alter and not just faking it. When you want to think about dissociative identity disorder, if you said that to somebody in the public, they wouldn't know what you meant. But if you said multiple personality disorder, oh yeah, I totally know about that, which, as we alluded to earlier, is oftentimes confused with schizophrenia, as if somehow people with schizophrenia have multiple personalities, which, as we talked about, in two entirely different disorders. But in terms of the general public, I think what you see is you see movies, going all the way back, if you're going to think back to books like Jekyll and Hyde, or currently in the United States of Tara, which is on, I want to say Showtime, but I'm not entirely sure. It all goes back to this idea that it's possible for people to have a host and have alters. And so I think in the public, if you were to say there's some real controversy about whether this exists, people say, really? It's so prevalent in not in the media, but certainly within Hollywood. So I think that there's a general belief that it does exist, although I think if you were to speak with psychiatrists and psychologists, you'd find that very few, if any, have ever had a patient that does suffer from DID. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I've read the DSM about how it's set up. I can't dispute it or sort of corroborate its validity because, frankly, since I've never seen it, DID, it's hard for me to say whether it matches up with the DSM.
I wasn't aware I had DID, obviously, and nobody else was, of course, because really the whole purpose of DID is so that people don't really, as a kid, you don't want people to know that you're not normal. So it's how do you hide when something bad is happening in your house and you have to go out and pretend like everything's okay. I have a little sister who has DID as well. A lot of people with DID don't know they have DID. So it's pretty rare for two siblings who were both abused to really both realize they have DID. So I started drinking when I was about 16, actually. And I loved it because I didn't have to work so hard to dissociate anymore because I just get drunk. But the whole time, I was always like trying to figure out what was wrong with me because I was always very depressed. It was January of '95, and I was reading through still trying to figure out what's wrong with me, and I was reading through some of my diaries from elementary school, which I still had. I read this one statement that said, "I slept with Mom tonight," and I realized what that meant, and I fell to the floor, and I was in a ball, and I was crying. And so, like, at that minute, I realized what that meant. I knew it so much that I never spoke to my mom again. From that minute, I didn't call her and say, "I'm not speaking to you," I just never spoke to her. My mom abused my sister as well. My mother comes from a line of, her father was a child molester. My grandmother's father was a child molester. So my mom denies she was ever molested by her father or grandfather, which I know is a lie. There are all these conditions besides DID is just one condition of people who are sexually abused. The core problem is sexual abuse, and all the coping mechanisms. DID is a coping mechanism, just like alcoholism.
What did you say?
So that's the key. Is there are parts that have some of those memories or have that reality, and they're kind of trapped because we walled them off so that we can function and be fine.
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. No, you keep them away from me.
Subconscious parts of you that are dissociated off from the main part of you hold unconscious urges and needs that will continue to drive you in your present day actions if you don't recognize them and learn to accept them. And I owe that to those parts of me who saved me so that I could survive, to give them the time to talk about what happened to them and be able to help them deal with it. There's not many people that are looking to claim that they're survivors of childhood sexual abuse. In fact, most people don't want to ever tell anybody that they are. And people don't want to run around telling people they have DID just for the hell of it.
I was thinking about what a charade this is.
It's easy for the professionals to be able to tell if somebody's just faking it in order to get attention. Because I'm sure that does happen. I don't know who. I mean, someone would have to be really sick to do that, but I'm sure it happens. Majority of people that have DID, then they're diagnosed, deny it because they don't want to have it. There's no many people coming forward and go, "Yes, I want to have DID," and trying to convince a therapist they have it.
It's just me.
Dissociative identity disorder. DID. What if DID, which incidentally is rarely diagnosed outside North America, doesn't actually exist?
If they're trying to dispute that DID exists, they're basically just saying childhood abuse is not that bad. But it's not that they're saying DID is not real. They're saying that childhood sexual abuse is not so severe that it could produce dissociation. In fact, it almost always produces dissociation of some degree because it's impossible to deal with something that's happening right now, and so you have to leave mentally. That happens in war all the time. Nobody disputes that people that come back from war don't have PTSD. They hear a helicopter overhead and they're home and they think they're being attacked like they're more. Nobody disputes that. So what's the difference in, someone with DID seeing someone that looks like their mother and being triggered and being, what's the difference? There is no difference. The issue is being triggered in the present by something that happened in the past. So I don't want to respond to somebody in the present based on how my kid parts in the past feel. So if somebody in my work reminds me of my mother, I don't want to lash out at them. The treatment plan is to identify those parts, identify what their purpose was, identify what memories they hold and what pieces to your psyche they hold, and then to be able to accept them all and not want to deny any of them.
The general treatments for disorders across the spectrum tend to usually be therapy and meds. I would say the most often used therapy is integration therapy, which is actually designed to try to integrate all of these alters, maybe from 20 down to 5 down to 1, with the assumption that having these alters is not a beneficial experience. This is not dissociative identity benefit. This is a disorder. This is something that pathologically plagues the people who suffer from it.
I just think the public needs to understand that DID is not a rare condition, and also the DSM-5 that's coming out, I think this month, the criteria for DID is now going to be more inclusive. Now it's going to talk about people having personality states that may not be as developed as so that they're not maybe losing time, but they're still dissociating because another part is taking control, and they're looking at that happening and seeing that I'm not in control. So just that people understand that it's not the foreign concept. It's not crazy. It makes sense in light of the fact that somebody was abused as a child. It makes perfect sense.